Hello, everyone. Welcome to the season finale of Bios and Bookmarks, the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I'm Shivani Ramalochan, and it's surprising to think we've come to this point already. I've had such a good time with all of you talking about this season's theme, which, as you know, has been crime and wonderment. And with me are two authors who I can't pretend I'm not excited. Like, there's no finesse here. There's no poise. I'm so happy to welcome Courttia Newland and Tobias Buckell. Welcome so much to both of you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to be talking, actually you're going to hear very little from me, which I think is as it should be, about Courttia's new novel, it's an epic. It is tremendously exciting. It, I think, is positioned to completely reshape the way that we think about the speculative fiction genre. I was just speaking to Courttia and Tobias about the fact that Caribbean speculative fiction has always been here. And for me, that is what makes it one of the most extraordinary of genres. It's called A River Called a Time. I'm going to introduce both Courttia and Tobias now and then exit stage right or left or wherever you exit through Zoom these days. Courttia is an author of several novels, as well as a screenwriter, most recently for Steve McQueen's Small Axe, Lovers Rock, which was jury selected by Cannes in 2020, opened at the New York Film Festival also in 2020, and several other accolades. A River Called Time is published by Canongate Books and Akashic Books, and Cosmogramma is forthcoming from Canongate in 2021. Interviewing Courttia is Tobias Buckell, and I should mention that both Courttia and Tobias are no strangers to either the NGC Bocas Lit Fest or Trinidad and Tobago. And hopefully, in a post-pandemic world, if such a thing will exist, they can discuss this when they get into it. We'll be welcoming them both back here very soon. Tobias was born in the Caribbean. He's a New York Times bestselling and World Fantasy Award-winning author. His novels and almost 100 stories, maybe more than 100 by now, Tobias, have been translated into 19 different languages. He's been nominated for the Hugo Award, Nebula Award, World Fantasy Award, and Astounding Award for Best New Science Fiction Author, and he currently lives in Ohio. And this is where I will now exit and turn things over to Tobias and Courttia. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Courttia, I'm really excited to hear this because what happens next is that you're going to give us a reading from your work.
Great, thank you. Just before I do that, I just wanted to, I'm reading from this, which is the Canongate version of the book, which is my marked up version, but I just this week got the Akashic edition, so I just wanted to show this off because I'm really excited. It's beautiful, and
as you should be,
guys. Yeah, no, I'm really happy with that. So as I am with this as well, but that just came this week. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the novel because I think then I don't have to explain stuff. I always like it that way. Just from chapter 1. I'm not really going to explain anything for now about what the novel's about or anything. I just start us off, and then maybe once we get talking, I'll give the background of what's going on and who this character is and what the world is. Void. Hum. 360 degrees expansion, pervading known and unknown matter. Breath. Existence. Him. The first time he was struck by a spontaneous Nambula, Marcus Denny was 8 years old. Feet pushing hard on pedals, body leaning against handlebars, the wheels of the bike ahead glistening with sunlight. His attention was seized, and for a moment he saw the heavens in that shimmering rotation. He couldn't take his eyes away. There was pain in the center of his forehead. He was falling from his bike before he knew it. He must have blacked out, because the next thing he knew, he was lying on the pavement, elbows and knees raw, the bike a resting animal a yard or so from where he'd fallen. His friends stood over him. Tishari, Caris, Nesta. Marcus let them wrench him to his feet, limping back to his fallen metal steed, waving away their concern, their insistence he looked pale. Soon they rode in unison again, creaking gears and turning wheels, a random symphony beneath them. They stopped outside rusting gates propped open with fallen masonry. Flakes of orange made the once grand entrance look diseased. Grass and weeds stood as high as their waists. A slight breeze made the strands rustle like a whisper of ghosts. They sat on their bikes, staring at blighted metal. Silent. Nesta edged forwards, thin bicycle tire nudging the gate. He rolled over crumbled stone, standing and stamping on the pedals to gain more power, until he was over the obstruction. Inside, they followed, one after another. Marcus, Caris, and Tishari, the skinniest child, always last, lifting his chin towards graffitied walls, brow arched, fearful. The building was huge. Not compared to the Ark, of course, though it towered above their heads 4 stories high. They rode through warped frames of wooden doors into the main entrance hall, craning their necks to look at the roof. Fallen glass left the dusty brown sky exposed. Their school picture book showed chandeliers and birds wheeling overhead, but the boys saw neither. They got used to being alone, speeding up and down once polished marble floors, performing wheelies and long skids, creating miniature desert storms. When they grew bored, they explored alone. Marcus rode past closed ticket booths and parades of empty shops to the platforms where sleek grand trains once stood. He left his bike against a marble bench and jumped onto the tracks amongst long grass. Some of the weeds were green strands that looked like wheat. He lay against cool steel, trying to imagine what it must have been like. The olden days. He closed his eyes. The mute disk of sun hadn't moved by much when he woke. Marcus guessed he hadn't been sleeping long. He climbed back onto the platform, studying the multicolored lines of the Dinium route map, wheeling his bike into the entrance hall. There was no one. He thought they might have left, panicked for a moment, and then heard voices. Relief made him sag against handlebars. He smiled and hummed a soft tune, wheeling his bike in that direction. An open corridor, doors long ripped away or kicked down, black edged shadows. He paused, biting his lip. The rectangle of light in the opposite end was small and far. Gloom seeped. Marcus called into the expanse. No answer. Partly, he was glad. The faraway voices of his friends reached beyond dark. Spun cotton wisps, distant. He made up his mind, rolling over broken glass and wood, careful, into the solid length of night. Daylight seemed consumed by that murky length of corridor. He saw nothing. His own physicality mythical. The only knowledge he existed came from the warmth of his handlebars beneath his fingers, his own harsh breath. The beat inside his chest, hot blood. The corridor smelt musty, damp and old. Marcus could taste the odor. He covered his mouth, pushing with one hand, which made the going even tougher. The floor beneath him, thick with dust. He repeatedly bumped his tire against what felt like heavy blocks of concrete. His bike wheel stuck. He pushed again. Still nothing. Again. No luck. He climbed aboard the pedals, resolved to do what Nesta had, stand up and push down hard. There was a moment before he did this when Marcus had an inkling of what was to come. An image of himself and his friends, sprinting on bikes, screaming faces static. Metallic banging from a place he could not find, like a football smashing against a chain-link fence. A chuckling peal of laughter, somewhere beyond his peripheral vision. He felt the sound in his stomach, an ache. That's still there, thank you.
And did you say you had a second piece you're going to read?
Oh, should I do that now? I can do
Yeah,
that
you
now.
still got 5 minutes.
Oh, have I? Wow, great.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
quicker than I thought. Amazing. Okay, cool. Just to, all right, I will need some context for the second piece then. Just to clarify, Marcus lives in this alternate city called Dinium, which takes place in an alternate parallel world where slavery and colonization never happened. And because slavery and colonization never happened, African cosmology has become the dominant religion. So ancestor worship, chakras, astral projection, all of those things are just normal and commonplace. Everyone does them, as one character in the book says. Apart from Marcus, he doesn't. But he has spontaneous out-of-body experiences anyway, which is what happened to him at the start of the book. But there was a huge war called the War of Light between spiritualists and secularists. And the center of London, what we call inner city now, has been completely obliterated. And there's been low-level radiation because of that. There was a bomb. And they built a huge building in the middle of inner city, which otherwise is wasteland. And that's called the Ark. And basically, that's where all the rich people live and all the poor people live outside in outer city. You can get into the Ark as a poor person. It can be menial work. You can be like a low-level laborer or various other jobs, or you can get in by winning something called the Excellence Award. So Marcus studies, he wins the Excellence Award, and he's going to go into the Ark in this section that I will read from. So this is the day he goes inside, as they call it. They rose at 8, had breakfast by 9, and by 9:30 the parents and children waited in the lobby, visibly nervous. Shared anxieties broke silence. They spoke, not to make polite conversation, only to reassure themselves everything would be fine. The bland official appeared before them, all smiles and congratulations, annoying catchphrases. They ignored his phony jubilation, letting themselves be led to a small dark car with blackened windows like a hearse. Willow, that's his mother, balked. The official was at her shoulder in an instant with more smiles, some gentle nudging, and they were in. Doors slammed, twin crunches. The car moved. Everything had been so low-key up until that point. His first sight of the crowds and cameras and protesters had the effect of being punched. Although they were not the thousands that had besieged the station in the early days, the crowd still numbered over 500 and would be rounded up to 8 on that night's evening news. The car slowed. People were on the roads, pavements, signs, rooftops, bus shelters, window ledges, parked cars, anything that could hold their weight. Grateful for tinted windows, Marcus watched people beat fists against the glass in delirium, scream they were sellouts cursed by Ra, or simply stand as motionless as they could manage in the jostling crowd, attempting to take pictures. But what? Nobody knew. Glass rendered their cameras useless. All through the onslaught, Marcus watched, barely taking a breath, barely feeling Willow's hand on his back rubbing in gentle circles. Beside him, Senior was equally stunned by what he saw. Junior went silent for a time, then suddenly screamed loud, turned beetroot, and apologized immediately. Eventually, all of them dreading the moment, the car came to a gradual halt. Doors opened and there were hands, a forest of them, searching as the driver yelled that they should leave the vehicle right now. Senior went first, then Junior. Then Marcus himself was pulled into the noise, the colors, the screaming, jeering, shouting, cheering, going off in their ears. Snatches of sentences from hundreds of open mouths. Everything too bright, too noisy. The tinny sound of a band could be heard from somewhere near. The air was a jungle of odors ranging from cigarette and Piaro smoke to hot dogs, sulfur, sweet nuts, perfume, frying onions, alcohol, and vomit. Marcus stumbled, turning to see his mother flailing between 2 rows of Elal masked, black-suited men who formed parallel lines from the car doors and beyond. Long-barreled guns drawn, they held the crowd back, saying nothing other than, "Keep moving, sir, madam. Please keep moving." He shouted to see if Willow was all right, but there was so much noise his voice was lost, and before he could try again, his eye was caught by one of the larger protest banners, luminous yellow, screaming, "Inner city is a lie. Let them stay." Nothing. No sound, only a silent movie playing in front of him, people jumping, screaming, punching fists into polluted air, driven by passion Marcus had never seen. That was when he noticed one particular protester, bearing a smaller sign that said, "Today as yesterday, tomorrow as today is truth." you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we proceed, can we get the title and where the books are coming out so that everyone who heard that can immediately write this down and make sure they pre-order copies?
Right. So this Canongate version, the UK version, came out on January 7th. It's called A River Called Time, by myself, obviously. And this Akashic version, I think it's April 7th. It's coming up. I know it's definitely April. So this is forthcoming. You can pre-order this. And this is the US edition, as I was saying, A River Called Time.
Awesome. Wow. So one of the things that really jumps out at me immediately is that so many diasporic books, diasporic authors play with time and alternate time. You and I were just talking about how Octavia Butler just had the honor of having the landing site named after her, but immediately she jumps to mind as someone who plays both with time, alternate timelines. I'm thinking of Brodber's The Rainmaker's Mistake as well, plays with time in some interesting ways. All in service of kind of reinterpreting our present in ways that I don't think I see as much in non-diasporic fiction. Can you talk to us a little bit about your perceptions of playing with time and alternate timelines within?
I mean, the obvious answer is in the first instance, right? You know, our present and our history is so like it's so set with so much, you know, tragedy in a sense. You know, we've had so much tragedy in the past. Of course, who would not want to rewrite that? Who would not want to play with that? Who would not want to ask the questions, what if? But also, I'm thinking about Dexter Palmer's Version Control. I don't know if you know that novel, but in that, you know, he's got these two security guards, black security guards, talking about whether they would go back in time. And of course, the answer would be like, hell no, I wouldn't go back in time. Why would a black man go back in time? I found that really hilarious, and it's something that we talked about amongst my friends a lot. You know, never mind if we were sci-fi geeks or not. You know, just generally, just would you go back? Hell no. And then there's a Dave Chappelle sketch, you know, that is kind of riffing off that as well. You know, but yeah. So it's, you know, the word I was looking for was fraught. You know, our past and our presents are so fraught with, you know, this thing that's happened. You know, the matter that happened to us. That I think, you know, yeah, of course we're going to play with the notions of time. I mean, it's just intrinsic to our being. You know.
One of the things that's really interesting about this, though, is I find I was reading your interview with the Financial Times, and one of the things we talk about is that. There is a resistance in traditional publishing to diasporic authors playing with that, because what they want is to focus on the fraught history and the high drama, the sort of burdens, the misery, the toil. Did you find resistance to wanting to play with time like this, to create an African cosmology that has taken over and is widely adopted?
Yeah, that was the main resistance, was the African cosmology part of it. My playing with time was okay. It could be yeah, it was all right. Like, as long as I did it through quantum physics. If I did it through quantum physics, as one agent said to me at one point in time, he said, that'll be okay. That'll be okay. But isn't there, it isn't like, you know, what he called mysticism, the antithesis of science fiction. That's what he said to me. So I was just like, no, it depends on whose perspective you're talking from, right? And it's not the antithesis of my view of science fiction. But yeah, and also, you know, it's the idea of, you know, I mean, I call this novel speculative fiction because it's precisely that, it's speculation. You know, what if is a speculative, you know, notion, isn't it? You know, so like, of course, then it falls right into the pocket of speculative fiction, you know. And yeah, I noticed a number of people have said things like, you know, it's kind of like, it's okay to go back into the past and imagine what would happen if you could kill Hitler and all those questions. But these questions are not within the remit of you know, what science fiction should be about, speculative fiction should be about, which I think is ludicrous, obviously.
Right. I mean, we get to decide what it is as we make it. There are no sort of external bounds. One of the things I did find interesting about this is that I do notice that Caribbean diasporic fiction, playing with science fiction, does something that a lot of modern SF does actually stray away from, which is mixing all of these different topics together. There's definitely this sort of kind of I would say like remix culture thing that we have in diaspora, where we say like, okay, we're going to take this from here and take this from there. And people usually associate it with, food or music. But I think here you're doing the same thing in fiction, right?
Yeah.
You're not letting yourself be bound by any sort of idea of that there's these strict hierarchies. And if you're going to write a time travel novel, you do it in this specific way. Did you feel like you were breaking those boundaries as you were writing it? Or do you think that's something that comes natural?
Yeah, it's natural to us in the sense that, that's our whole makeup, everything we are comes from that hybridity, like it's just, it's everything we do and think and feel is about that. So for me, obviously it's the most natural thing in the world. Also for me, just growing up, looking at mad professor albums and scientist albums, you know what I mean? And like, it just like dub in, as a kid, my first sci-fi experience is dub music, you know what I mean? Like that's me, just like where I'm feeling that stuff, like I feel like rather than even thinking about it or seeing it, and this is like I said, this is long before I encountered Lando, you know what I mean? Like long before even I started watching Star Trek, when I was really like, I'm talking about 2-3 years old, I'm feeling this music that feels to me like science fiction. I'm going to the record store in Harsden and I'm seeing these album covers and it's written in like,
the covers, yes.
Yeah, digital, text, and he's standing in front of a bank of computers and he's like, it's got turntables and all this stuff and they were connected. And so it's always been that way. I feel I say this a lot. I was born into that stuff, and I just feel like, it's the most natural thing in the world to me.
I was always really struck by sort of like George Clinton and the Mothership, and this sort of way in which the science fictional, this sort of Afrofuturism was blended all throughout so many of those different visions that you found it. Even though it wasn't showing up in sort of like written science fiction, it was very much there in consciousness.
I feel like our it's really interesting because we have this culture which is the mainstream culture, and then we have the culture which is our culture, and our culture is always doing the stuff that feeds us directly, which is not to say I'm not getting the same thing from David Bowie and whatever. I'm getting it from them, and that's what the beauty is of being able to fuse these things together, is because we're getting it from that direction, okay, so this thing isn't serving us, but over here we're being completely served, so yeah, that's what taught me the joy of it. There was no you can't do this, because it was being done regardless of whether it was being done in the mainstream arena. It's being done over here.
Right, and that kind of gives you that freedom to go tinker and play, because it's being done already. Absolutely.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, you work in so many different medias. It was mentioned that you're part of the Small Axe thing, which, by the way, for people who are viewing, if I recall correctly, it's available on Amazon Prime. If you have access to that, you should be able to see some of your work right there as well. So you work with scripts, you work with short stories, you work with novels. Why so many different medias?
Just having fun, just playing around, I just like having fun, and it's what I get into. It's what brings me joy. It's what I love to see myself, I always had a love of theatre. It's strange in the UK a little bit, because in the UK, like, theatre felt like a very closed off space, like it was only for European stories, or for American stories, or English stories. And then, someone gave me the gift of, okay, well, why don't you just tell your stories that way? And I did it in a monologue. And then that was it. The first time I saw someone perform it, and it's like, oh, yeah, this does work. It's weird how your brain works, in the way that you're alluding to. I thought that I couldn't do theatre, but from the minute I saw it, I was like, yes, you can. And then, then that was it, So I just get excited about stuff, and I want to try stuff. And some of the stuff I try doesn't work. Like, I'm a terrible poet. I can't do poetry, man. I've tried and tried and tried, and then I said, you know what, let me leave that alone. But other things I've tried and it works out all right. So, or I want to do it. Like, screenwriting did not come easy to me, but I really, really wanted to do it. So I had to learn the craft over a number of years,
What I like about hearing you talk, though, is this sort of like permission that you have to just go out there and do it without trying to wait for some kind of formal pathway or permission or anything like that. The idea that you can just, in this day and age, just go, I'm going to write it, and take that as the first step.
Yeah. I mean, again, it comes from us. It comes from a reggae aesthetic. It comes from a hip hop aesthetic where people just did it. They didn't have all the tools, at their hands. They have a lot of money, but you could go off and do these things. I think it definitely comes from that. But also, I have to say, I can say this now, in my like 40s. Looking back, I'd say I was just not really. I was a bit rebellious where education was concerned, and I always have been, to my mum's eternal sorrow. I just didn't want to do it that way. I just didn't feel like that was serving me in the same way. And again, it was that thing of like the education system was not providing the things that I needed, but it was being provided over here. So I'm going to go that way. I'm not going to go this way.
So we're at roughly the midpoint of the hour, and I just wanted to go ahead and ask you about the 100 Caribbean books that made us, which is kind of what has been the theme for all of these discussions, and ask you about the specifically Caribbean books that had a really big impact on you. Okay, so the first thing I can really remember, I'm not quite sure if it was the first, but the first thing that had a completely mind-blowing effect on me was The Children of Sisyphus by Orlando Patterson. I really got into that novel. Now, I can't talk about it too much because I don't have it here. It's in my mum's house, and I don't have it in my house here where I live. But also, I haven't read it since I was a small child, like really small. Too small, perhaps, to have been reading that book. I think back on it, But it was on the shelf. I would pick books off my mum's shelf. She had Ben O'Cree, she had Rushdie, and I would just pick them up and I would read them. And that was one of them that I picked off her shelf and read it, and it became mine, And for me, I just feel like what I can remember about it was just this idea of talking about working class culture. That's what blew my mind. The fact that you could tell stories about these people. Again, I hadn't known that was possible, really, in that sense, especially from a Caribbean perspective, maybe not from a British Caribbean perspective, but just, people where I could read. The language was in the way that I'd heard, I understood the mannerisms and things. It was in there, and I just, I think that was the first time that the seed was planted where I thought to myself, you can say these things in a book. It's not just watching The Harder They Come, and it's not just listening to the music. Here it is in this form as well, this format. So definitely. That's really cool. That's really cool. That that permission makes me think of Chimamanda Ngoche's Myth of the Single Narrative, right? Which is that when you're given all those canon books, when you first start out as a creative, you're just trying to imitate. And so you imitate what's put in front of you. But books like that give you this sudden permission or this glimpse of the fact that it doesn't have to be that sort of external alien world. It's something that you can go and grab your own interests and bring to, which definitely I think is powerful. So powerful realization.
Yeah, I really appreciate that TED talk. I really appreciate what Chimamanda was saying. But it's really interesting as well, because for me, I had a slightly different experience. I had the experience of people giving me those books from like young, people. Oh wow, there's a black boy and he likes to read. Okay, and people would just give me everything. But specifically, certain people, there's certain men who'd be like, okay, well, you need to go to Grassroots Bookstore in like Goulburn Road, or you need to have this book, or you need to go to the Third World Radical Book Fair. So once they realized, like, I got given a lot of black authors, and I think that really, helped me at a very young age. Again, be able to say, okay, I can see that this is being done here, and not. They were worried for me. My mum was even worried about. We had Dick and Jane. I think it was Dick and Jane when I was growing up. Like the kids' books and stuff. Yeah. I remember hearing my mum talk to my friend. She said, "I don't like him reading those books. I don't like him reading those." So they were very aware that we need to get in some other stuff. And they did.
I was always very grateful to have grown up in the islands so that I had a lot of exposure at a young age to just that, right? Yeah, exactly. Even just in the school system, we, there was some Dick and Jane, but there were also all these like primary book readers from Trinidad that we got,
Excellent. That's so cool. But also,
to this day, I'm actually still terrified of like earthquakes, because I remember this really graphic illustration of like the ground opening up and underneath someone in one of those readers. And I was just like, oh man, the ground is scary. I grew up on a boat, so I was just like, man, the ground is all kinds of scary.
I felt the same way about Andrew Sorky's Hurricane. I read that as a kid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that scared the hell out of me. I was like, really? Wow. I have to be careful when I go to the Caribbean. Might be a hurricane, you know. But yeah, it's really I don't know. It's just really funny to think that you know there was these distinctions being made, and it wasn't that we couldn't read those books, it's just that you had to have something else as well. But also being in the UK, obviously there's like, you know, we're not the majority, you know. I mean, I don't know, we're like, you know, 3% as a whole people of color right now. I think it's 3.5%, and I think then we might have been a bit less. So I think there was a real fear from our parents. It's almost like a real mad, again, like science fiction experiment when you think about it. Like my grandmother came over and then she brought my mum over, and then my father had come obviously independently with my grandfather when he was 12, my mum was 9. No one knew how we were going to turn out. No one had any idea. I think when we were born, my generation, people were just like, oh, right. So you don't inherently pick up being Caribbean. You know what I mean? It isn't just in your DNA. You just come out, you come out kind of English. So what do we do with that? You know what I mean? And so they were trying to like mitigate all these things, and but things that I think not a lot of people had had to deal with before, you know, in this context, you know. So I almost feel like a scientific experiment myself, in a sense, you know what I mean? Because we're like there's people aren't really, it's not like in America where you've had hundreds of years of people being African American. You know, we're fairly new, you know, in terms of being Black British, you know.
I could talk about that for hours with you, but it is now time, if you're able. We have time for another 5-minute reading here, is the way the structure works. Would you have something you'd be able to share with us?
I do have something I would be able to share with you.
Fantastic.
So through these spontaneous out-of-body experiences Marcus is having, he finds that he can travel to parallel times where he is parallel versions of himself. So he doesn't travel forwards or backwards in time, because we were talking about why I still want to do that. But he travels sideways. He travels into different realities, different possibilities for himself, and he does this a number of times. And the lady that I talked about in that extract that I just read, who has the sign today is yesterday, today is truth. That slogan belongs to a group called the Outsiders. They're kind of a radical group who don't believe in the arc, and they're really like almost like gurus, you know, shamans. And the first reality he goes to, Marcus goes to, he becomes one of the leaders of that radical group inside the arc. And they are the poorest of the poor. When he goes in as an Excellence Award winner, he's kind of, he's up there in the status. He's kind of like middle class in a sense, you know. But when he comes into this next parallel, he's very poor, the poorest of the poor almost. Although there is a strata that's below those. So I'll just do a little bit when he walks through the poor quarter. I'm trying not to give stuff away as well. So the poor quarter is the area that they live in. It's called the poor quarter, nicknamed the poor quarter. Charlton Estate is the real name. The walk took them further away from the high street, deep into the quarter, a maze of terraced residencies that mapped their territory, Charlton Estate. An outsider's zone, that was clear. Incense belched sandalwood ghosts. Gardens were filled with squat candles set in the form of their six-pointed star, the centered O. More difficult to see in low light were the spray-painted murals. Orishas, gods, deities, angels, and symbols adorned every surface. Walls and fences, doors and windows, paving slabs. Prayer flags, symbolic representations of the chakras, crescent moons, triangles, upward swirls. Often no shapes or symbols, only merged formulations of colors. Seamless mosaics of red into orange, orange into yellow, yellow into green, green into purple. Markers of dedicated outsiders' homes. Passing deeper into those residencies, a wave of movement turned candles into nocturnal coral, birthing polyp flames. Shadows formed and retracted in swelling motion. Doors opened, and families came. Marstons, Amens, Wazis and Okoros, Trinities, Mices, Braithwaites, Mongs, Fajimizans, surrounding Chile and Marcus, pressing determined bodies against theirs, reaching for temples and foreheads with rough fingers, touching bare skin, offering greetings and gifts of food, 4-wrap packages and bags of cloth. They wore dreadlocks and head wraps, hijabs and gelis, a glitter of whisper-thin robes and saris, agbadas and longis sweeping grimy streets and pavements with glints of starlight. People gave small, carved effigies, a kola wood Ganesh, polished and embedded with circular beige grain, a stone grey Shango, pearl teeth gritted in anger, and handfuls of others, some beautiful, most simple. Marcus took them gratefully, otherwise Chile accepted on his behalf, concealing them in the hemp bag at her side. They would be given to the temple, distributed amongst disciples. A rare few would make it to their allocation. He talked with all who'd left their homes to meet him, reassuring he was well, untouched by corpse or uprising. Corpse are like the police, their security force. He wasn't poisoned, neither had he succumbed to its. Teacher was in perfect health, alive. Questions came in muttered succession, each speaker knowing they should let them leave eventually. Given time, they retreated, heads bowed, pulling moon-eyed children by reluctant fingers, backwards like the rewound video of their childhoods until the doors closed and once more candlelight broke the silent darkness with its staccato, baritone language. Marcus and Chilishe walked further along the block, encountering more outsider residents who came and greeted the pair as their neighbors had, and onwards to the next block and the next, until finally they arrived at a large 2-story home adorned with white roses hung on the front door. The bouquet circled a sign made of simple white paper that bore the family name, visiting hours, and times of prayers in a careful printed hand. A lean, dark man smoked tobacco nearby. Marcus tried to remember his name. Chile, as ever, read his mind, standing on tiptoes, whispering into his ear. Their son, the son, Parv, discarded his splint and came to them, clasping their hands. Reddened eyes, far off, hardly resting on any one thing, a mind full of all the chores to perform inside the house perhaps, or in ether with the spirit of his loved one. Marcus recalled a similar unmooring after Ninka joined the ancestors, that's his brother. He wasn't even sure if he'd returned to the full consciousness of mortal existence, even after all the years since. Okay, I'll leave that there.
And again, that is A River Called Time.
Thank you.
Fantastic. We are now able to take some questions from the audience, and I hear from our organizers that you all are being a little bit shy, but we do have some questions here. So as we're talking about these, please send in your questions. We would love to have Courttia answer them for you. So the very first question we have here is, how much more can we hope to see from you in the speculative fiction genre? Is it a space that you want to continue creating in?
Yeah, I do want to continue creating in this space. I have a collection of short stories coming out later in the year. I think it's October in the UK and November in the US, so in the regions. And that's yeah, short stories. It's more traditional in its speculations. I think I'm kind of riffing on the old sci-fi style a bit in this. It's called Cosmogramma. And so yeah, that's coming.
Can we spell that so that we can look for that?
Yeah, it's COSOGRAMMA. And that title I basically stole from a Flying Lotus album. It was his, I think his second album. Yeah, I stole it from him. And he gave me his blessing to use it as well, which I was really stoked about. So yeah, that's really cool. I'm looking forward to that because it's very, very different to River Called Time. I've got a couple of other novel ideas, and I've written a short film. I've done a short film, sci-fi film, which is going to be part of a strand of Black British sci-fi, which is coming out with Film 4. So that's shot and been edited, and that's ready to go. And I'm working on, hopefully at some stage, a science fiction feature film. Yeah, which will be
amazing.
AI. Yeah. I mean, we're at the very early stages yet, but it's based on a short story from Cosmogram.
But you definitely want to come into this space and play more.
Yeah. I'll definitely play more in the space. I don't know if I'll stay playing in the space. It's really strange. I don't consider myself like a genre writer at all in that sense. I'm having fun with whatever genre I feel like.
Well, as we were talking about earlier, you're taking all of these inspirations from all over the place, and
definitely.
you're hopping around to where you want to as an artist, and that's amazing. I love it. Diane Nurse Gittins has a comment, not a question, and says, Courttia, the author weaves everything, let me do that again. The author weaves everything that is inside of us, but moves away from the traditional presentation. Way to go. So you definitely affected someone who was listening in there.
That's really cool. Thanks so much.
An anonymous question about research is, someone wants to know about the levels of research in the book, especially the extensive reading on African cosmology. And I'm thinking you have that great timeline in the very beginning.
Yes.
You have your maps of the area. So I, as a writer, always love to hear about other writers' research and how they got their way into the book.
Yeah. Man, the research on this one. I wish we were, I've just moved downstairs. My office used to be upstairs, and we've just given that room to my daughter. So now I'm downstairs.
I did that 4 years ago. I'm here in the basement. This isn't even real. This is the green screen.
yeah. Mine's very, I ran around today trying to make this tidy. This formerly was my kids' playroom, and it was like stuff everywhere, Lego everywhere.
I mean, you can see this here. Like, I'm looking professional, but
I love that. Oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't even know that was there. I did so much research. If I could show you the amount of books, it's like 2 shelves worth of books basically that I read for them. Not all of them for the book, not all of them, but most of them. I read books on the chakras. I read books on African philosophy and religions. I read a lot of books on cosmology. I read books by European authors on astral projection, projection of the astral bodies, radionics and the subtle anatomy of man. I was reading books like that. David Tansley, The Voodoo Quantum Leap by Reginald Crosley was one of my favorites, man. I went on a year-long course of Black History Studies. I always like, when I write a book, it doesn't matter if I'm writing about a West London Black British guy like me, I really go heavily into research anyway, and I talk to people and stuff. So the whole time I was writing the book, all the way through until I finished the book, after I'd finished the book and I was editing it, I continued my research right up until the book got published. And but it was so much fun. It was like cramming for a really, really fun exam. That's how I look at it.
That's great. I think, like, for some writers, I think the actual writing of the book is just an excuse to have gotten all that reading done.
Oh, it's totally. I mean, I was going to say that as well. Like, every book I write comes from an urge about something, a curiosity about something that I'm interested in. So, and then I just read up about it. It gives me an excuse. So then I buy books in advance, knowing one day I've got a load of AI books for the time where I do this AI story that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And then I've got, it's work, right? So I can read those books.
I often, with the amount of research, feel that, like, when I'm asked to do an interview about a book, I make it sound like way worse, more dreadfully academic than it really is. It's like,
really,
no, let's talk for an hour about, like, the microcredit transactions that are fascinating me right now.
Right.
I swear to God, there's an adventure story there, but.
Well, this goes back to my schooling, in the sense that what happens to me is that once I've done all that research, I forget it all. I can't remember it. And it's like, I've done it and I put it into the book and I understand it. But like, the minute I stop, it just goes. And then I'm really worried. I said, you said you did all this research and you can't remember this, that, and the other. And someone puts me on the spot. Or I meet a real academic who knows all that stuff and starts trying to quiz me on it. And I'll be like, I can't remember, man. I'm on to the next thing.
I'm terrified when people ask me things about a book I wrote in 2006, because it's like, I'm ADD and dyslexic. Like, I did all the reading, I understood all the stuff, but I don't remember anymore.
Yeah. I don't remember anything. It's in and out, basically.
I got another question. Marina Solandi Brown would like to know, how does Courttia differentiate between fantasy and science fiction?
I was teaching one day, and I said that I don't, and a guy who's writing fantasy got really angry with me. He was just like, there is a difference. I mean, Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious in terms of world and character, and the kind of beings that can people those worlds. But I'm a really bad person to ask about that, clearly, from the reaction of my
As we were
student.
just talking, yeah.
I don't. You talked about screenplays and stories and stuff. I don't see the difference. I really don't. It's a different format, but it's all story. That's what I always say to people. So for me, no, I mean, fantasy is great. I haven't thought of a story in that fantasy realm, but if I do, I'll write it. And yeah, I don't really differentiate between them. Yeah.
There's some writers who make the argument that like it's all fantasy because the original literature is Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh,
Right, exactly.
the Bible,
Exactly.
mythology, and then from there oral tradition and stories, and that's all very fantastic. And then quote unquote realism is just a branch of saying this is going to be something that reflects our day as we see it with none of the fantastic elements,
right?
Which makes it the sort of subgenre.
Exactly. Well, that's what I thought was why doing something like this was legitimate, because when I looked back into the old stories, we started off in fantasy and sci-fi. I found an old proto science fiction Japanese story about someone who took a rocket to the moon and stuff. A king got and took a rocket to the moon. So we started off with the stuff that we write.
Exactly. So, China had Chang'e is the rocket strapped to the chair to the moon. It's fantastic. Celia Sarando, do you believe we help co-create our reality, our future? And if so, do you believe any responsibility? Do you feel any responsibility for the future you imagine and write about in your own speculative fiction?
Yeah, there was a really interesting conversation on Facebook about the fact that maybe as Black writers, we should write more utopian reality, more utopian science fiction, because dystopian could be quite slightly misleading in terms of a message. I mean, I would argue on either side of that. I could argue either side of that quite easily, I think, but I think that's what my book is about. Interesting enough, I think that's ultimately, which is why I was talking about truth. I think at the core of this novel is this idea of truth, and should we tell the truth? When should we tell it? What do we lose when we don't tell the truth? What do we gain when we do? All of these things are really deeply embedded in the book. I don't believe in hitting people over the head with a message. I feel that they're, in stories, but I feel that stories should have some kind of intention, especially our stories. Yeah, there should be a point to them, And I just watched something last night, and I was watching the whole of it. And I was like, that was amazing, but I don't know why I was watching that story. I have no idea, like what it was fundamentally about. And I think I like stories that are fundamentally about something. Call me old school, But also, I think we do, in answer to that question. I asked a number of authors this, and there's that writing and responsibility. There's essays. But I believe we do have a responsibility. I believe we should be saying something that's for the good, rather than saying something that's otherwise. Now, how you do that is a different matter, and it doesn't mean that every character in the book has to be intrinsically good or anything like that. But I feel like you should. I don't know, you should just be really careful with the fiction that you write. Like, have you ever been told off, Tobias, for something that you've written by a reader or a friend or something like that, and then you've realized that they were right?
Oh, absolutely. It's hard on the ego, but it's important.
Yeah, it happened to me straight off the bat where something, I think, it was a friend of mine, and they were just like, you shouldn't have written that. That's bad. You shouldn't use that terminology. That's really quite damaging to people. And I thought, oh my God, yes it is. And I didn't even realize I'd written it. It was that thing that I'd just done in an offhand way because that's the words we use. But yeah,
people get really wounded by that stuff. Particularly creators, because they feel like they should be able to write about anything. And I do think you should be able to write about anything, but also you should absorb the reaction, right?
You can't just write without consequences.
And I often tell new writers to think about it like putting bricks in a wall, right? Yes, we can all look at like one small brick and be like, it's just one brick, right? But you have to be careful about where you're putting it, right? If you're one of 1,000 bricks that does the same exact thing, you're part of this like edifice that is creating something that might be negative. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, yes, this is just one small stone, but am I contributing to basically a large, hailstorm?
Exactly.
And that's kind of the framing I look at it, you know, to say like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not that harmful to have this one little thing like this. But then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's step back and look at the context. You
Hold
know,
on.
along this line, Paper-Based Bookshop has a question here. Do you feel the pressure to ever be more representative of more than yourself in any given literary space? You're a prolific writer in multiple genres. So like, what is it like to deal with the external societal pressures that come from these competing spaces?
Okay, I'm going to do that really annoying author thing now, which we all do as well, which is I'm going to completely contradict what I just said. because at the
You're large
same
and you
time,
contain multitudes.
exactly. We have to. But and you know, contradiction is everything, I suppose, for us as human beings. But like, yeah, like, yeah. At the same time, like, I always feel like, okay, I've got to. It's weird. I was thinking about what you were just saying then, and so okay. The worst brick that you can put in that wall is the brick that you didn't mean to, that you weren't thinking about. You know what I mean? Like, oh, there's that brick there, and oh, wow, I didn't even know it was there. You know, that's when I'm like, okay, it's terrible. Now, if I had an intention of something else with that brick, if I was trying to do, you know, good, doesn't mean always that I should have put it there, but at least I have an idea of why I put it there, and I will hold up my hands and take full responsibility for that. And sometimes I will, you know, slap my wrist and say, you know, don't do that again. Or sometimes I will say to myself, oh, okay, you know, like I did it for that reason, and this is why, you know. And there are, you know, quite recently, things that I've done that have annoyed people. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I take responsibility for that, and I stand by some of those things. There are things, like I said, I'll hold my hands up to. There are things that I would just be like, you know what, that's okay. I meant that for this reason, and I will argue that a little bit, you know. But I think it's the idea that we have no accountability at all that I balk at. You know what I mean? The idea that, oh, just, you know, you don't be quiet, and I'm not going to listen to you. I will always listen, or I always sit down and talk with someone. I always be like, okay, I see your point of view, but here's mine. You know, or I see your point of view, I'm going to change that. So,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, no, one of the more uncomfortable literary experiences in my life was an hour-long drive where, you know, someone was bringing me up to speed on what I'd done wrong. And, you know, I wasn't there for it, you know, initially, but about halfway through, you know, it was like, okay, yes, you know, I understand how that hurt you. I disagree.
Yeah.
I'm not going to change what I did, but
yeah,
I now have a broader understanding of how that how that added to the brick wall.
yeah, exactly.
And I want to know forward how to not add to that brick wall, you know, and think about that.
Yeah, but you don't want to go completely to the other end of the scale where you're so like burdened by representation. I don't believe in that really, but you're thinking so much about being representative that you're not being truthful in a sense. You know, that's
well,
what
great art isn't committed. Great art isn't created by committee.
No, exactly. Yeah, and that's it. Really.
Now we come to the fun bit of the read, write, or avoid scenario for you, Courttia. And that is, you know, a proposal. Newland's Old Ways, a 100-verse rap epic, taking us through the books you've written in 100 parallel realities. And you have to sing it. Read, write, or avoid.
Okay, I have a question. If I read it, do I still have to sing it?
Ooh. So like spoken word interpretation.
Yeah, like if someone else has written it. Then
the powers that be just said yes.
Damn. Okay, avoid.
Avoid.
No way. Those days are done. I did that.
Those days are done.
Yeah, go back to that.
You just gotta like channel your inner William Shatner and do it like his Rocket Man album.
Did he do it?
Have you ever heard this?
No.
Oh, when you're done here, you get on YouTube and type in William Shatner Rocket Man. It is a spoken word interpretation of the Bowie song.
No. Okay.
It is a thing to behold.
Okay, I will behold it.
Well, I think our host is going to come back on now for the thank yous and goodbyes, because I think this puts us at 5:55, which means we have 5 minutes left.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tobias. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Thank you. This was a tremendous fun.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Did we laugh too much? Is that a problem?
Thank you both so much. I was completely spellbound. And I think anyone in the audience who wasn't already into Courttia's book and Tobias's books as well. Their minds have been changed.
Legend.
You've done a revolution through both like laughter and entertainment. It's been such a treat to listen to the both of you. We're going to leave links to Courttia's book and also to Tobias's website in our comment section. So please do check them out. I want to thank you both so much for this hour. I can't believe an hour has passed so quickly. It's been a real pleasure to be in this space with the both of you.
Thank you so much.
And this brings us to the end of Bios and Bookmarks, Crime and Wonderment. I want to give special thanks to all the authors we've had on the program for this 6-episode season. Jacob Ross, Monique Roffey, P. Jelly Clark, Tracy Batiste, Sheena Kamal, and of course, Courttia Newland. Thanks too to the members of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest team who've been a big part of Bios and Bookmarks, Anna Lucy Smith, Alana Marie Gopal, and Marielle Forbes. Bios and Bookmarks will return in May, but before then, you cannot miss the 2021 NGC Bocas Lit Fest. That's the 23rd to the 25th of April. And yes, it is entirely virtual, so there are no excuses barring the loss of your internet. Hopefully in 2022, we will all be able to share a physical space. Till then, everyone, please stay safe, stay well, and take care of each other. Thank you all so much for being here. Bye.